Hello and welcome to Syria Talks, the unique show exploring the intricacies of the Syria crisis. I'm your host, Danny Mackey. As the world focuses on forming a new strategy to tackle the Islamic State, President Obama has agreed to add more bases and instructors in Iraq. This is part of the plan to fight the militant group and further train Iraqi army and Kurdish forces. This comes after the fall of Ramadi, the provincial capital of Anbar in Iraq, and Palmyra, the historic Syrian city, to ISIS militants. With this continued threat looming and the growing indecisiveness over Syria and Iraq, we discuss what the future holds for the war on ISIS and how the group can be successfully fought. Joining us today will be Sukant Shandan, a political commentator, Iyad Khudr, a political activist from Damascus, and Scott Reichard, a former American intelligence linguist from the US. But before we begin, let's take a quick look at this video report on the latest in the war on ISIS.
Whilst the Islamic State continues to thrive and establish itself as a regional threat in the Middle East, Western policy options to deal with the group are running increasingly thin. The US is dispatching around 450 additional military instructors to help Iraq's government recapture Ramadi and al-Mosul, which will add to the 3,500 US military personnel already on the ground. US President Barack Obama's decision should come as no surprise, as over the past few weeks we have seen increasingly worrying headlines about the radical terror group's advances in the region. With the fall of Palmyra, ISIS now controls over 50% of Syria's landmass, on top of its gains in Iraq, which includes the recent invasion of Ramadi. According to experts, defeating ISIS would require thousands of ground troops to actually lead the fighting, and that's just the kind of commitment Obama is keen to avoid. In a recent speech, Obama stated that for the foreseeable future, the most direct threat to America at home and abroad remains terrorism. However, this has not changed the dire situation in Syria and Iraq, which continues to deteriorate with every passing week.
Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Scott Reichard, if I could just start with you. Barack Obama's foreign policy has come under much scrutiny. Why is that?
Well, first of all, Barack Obama's been talking out the side of his mouth. He's obviously saying one thing and doing another. Independently, he may believe something, but as a leader of the United States, he's in lockstep with the military-industrial complex. He's in lockstep with the intelligence community. He's done nothing to slow down the flow of arms into the region, and he's also reestablished a long-standing relationship with the warlords of the region, whereby he's constantly stepped in with the Jordanians, the Saudis, the Tunisians, who make up most of these forces that are belonging to ISIS, and he's made a very concerted effort in really minimizing the impact against the forces that we're supposedly attacking. If you just look at the simple numbers, ISIS, the numbers ranged anywhere from 15,000 to 30,000. The Pentagon has it under 20,000 members, whereby which in the last 9 months they claim to have killed over 10,000 of the members. So we're talking about a force that's very small. In comparative to the late 90s and the Kosovo War, there were over 80,000 troops in Milosevic's army, and the battle that raged there only raged for a few months, and there were over 30,000 bombing campaigns.
This comes in under the context of similarly in Iraq, where you had the fall of Mosul and 30,000 Iraqi soldiers, which was almost double the amount of the whole of the fighting core of ISIS in Iraq. So how has the Islamic State been able to crush this much larger opposition and create or ultimately force upon the United States a global coalition to fight it?
Well, let's not overestimate or emphasize the global activity of ISIS. I think that that's been pushed on us by the news agencies. Obviously, there are individuals who are interested in combating the Western imperialism in the region. The number is not very strong. At the same time, Iraqi soldiers or any soldiers that are going to risk their lives, they realize the danger in their jobs. These are people that have jobs that are not dedicated to them. And any time that they see any kind of heavily armed forces or forces that are much better trained, let's be clear here that a lot of these forces have been fighting since they're very young, that are in these mercenary forces that the CIA, MI6, Mossad, and French intelligence, Turkish intelligence have been training, not just for the ISIS theaters, but also in Libya and elsewhere more recently, and certainly
Okay, hold your
long-term
thought.
throughout
We'll get back to you on this issue. Sukand, if I could just ask you, groups such as ISIS have a very ideological core. What is the best way to fight them? Is it military, is it political, or is it purely ideological?
I think it's a combination of those three things. It's an interesting question you ask, because it's a difficult question to answer. But I think, yeah, it's a combination of all those three things. And to be honest, I think the Syrian government has, despite, its inordinate, difficult situation, and there's no words to describe the difficulty and the traumatic situation in which it finds, but I think the Syrian government has shown the best that exists in terms of leading this struggle, this counter-struggle against this particular death squad, and all the general death squads, who are all very similar in their modus operandi and in their ideology. But I think the Syrian government, more than the Iraqi government, and I give respect to the Iraqi government, the Baghdad government, in its fight against the death squads, but the Syrian government, I think, shows that it has the ideological leadership, it has the capacity, it has the military experience, and more than that, it's actually built a society, thanks to the father, the late president of the current president of Syria, Hafez al-Assad, in finishing the continuing coups and counter-coups, putting that to rest, stabilizing the country, fundamental land reform,
But on the other hand, you surely
redistribution,
have a numerous amount of Syrians would argue that this is one-party rule, this is a dictatorship. I mean, why should Syrians submit to this type of rule? Why should they not have the chance to choose different types of parties and leaders? Why does it have to be one party, one system called Baathism, which rules the country when it's so ineffective and inefficient? What would you say to that?
Well, if you want what you've had in the last 4 years in the once peaceful and beautiful country, which was Syria, then go ahead, open the gates for the death squads. Listen, I'm not against people protesting and organizing for reforms that to the benefit of the people and against the problems that we undoubtedly have internal to any global south country or Syria. But again, I think it's important to understand the nature of the Syrian government. Although it has a ruling party, it's not the sole party that's running Syria. There's many other coalition partners and political forces and political parties that operate in Syria in support
but only
of the Syrian
after
government.
certain reforms were introduced in 2011. Before 2011, it was strictly a case of emergency law. Now, is it just a case of the lesser of two evils, or is it just one side which is entrenched in an existential battle against another?
This is a complex conversation, and we haven't got the time, and arguably there is not enough time to go through this thoroughly. But the bottom line is this. Even people who are vested in what I call the neo-colonial death squad project of destruction against Syria, even people I know who support the armed overthrow of the Syrian government, all admit to me that before the spring of 2011, or the sting of 2011 perhaps, that Syria was one of the most peaceful, most beautiful, and relatively quite, in terms of the living standards and the infrastructure of the people, one of the best that the region has. All of that has been thrown away for what? So I asked those people who wanted reforms in Syria, is this the best way to go about it? And I think the traumatic ramifications and fallout from perhaps some people's well-intentioned attempts at changing things for the better has proven to be an absolute disaster, not only for the Syrian people, but for the people of the region.
We'll get back to this. Iyad Khadr here. How do you see US policy towards Syria and Iraq? Hello, Iyad?
Yes.
How do you
asking me about the policy of Syria and Iraq?
Yes. How do you see US policy towards Syria and Iraq?
Yeah. I think that there should be full cooperation between Syria and Iraq. I'm not sure, you asked me about Syria and Iraq or Iran?
Syria and Iraq. How do you view US policy towards Syria and Iraq?
Yeah. Actually, there should be a full cooperation between Syria and Iraq in combating ISIS.
Are the battlefields of Syria and Iraq now fully intertwined?
I think that while Iraq received the full support from the international community in fighting ISIS, at least in the diplomatic level, unfortunately, Syria lacks the support. For example, let me cite an example. For instance, when ISIS came to Palmyra, for Syrian army, maybe it should monitor the region before, but we know Syrian army is described in the mainstream media as a weak army, and its equipment and telecommunication equipment are go back to the Second World War. But what about the U.S. coalition against ISIS? I wonder when this coalition able to detect the advance of the ISIS convoys through the desert, the empty desert, when it was coming or approaching Palmyra. It's hard to believe that.
Okay, Iyad, hold that thought. Scott Reichard, if I could go to you, how is it possible that the US administration is not able to formulate a coherent policy regarding ISIS?
Well, clearly they did not anticipate the broad participation. Look at the participation that emerged out of Iraq, the participation that's emerged out of like probably 20 or 30 different factions of individuals that change alliances based upon which cities are overrun by which mercenary forces. So when you see these kinds of interactions and the monitoring that's going on, the U.S. has obviously got air superiority. They've got drones in the air. They've got the best intelligence on a force of, like we said, 20,000 individuals, and they're discerning these relationships and trying to make a decision on who do we back and who don't we back based upon how that's advantageous to our goals, like likely overthrowing Assad, and likely also providing a massive financial gain for the military-industrial complex.
But clearly there's an operational, structural problem with this, because the United States run out of targets to attack over Iraq within weeks. So when you fight an irregular movement, a guerrilla movement like ISIS, which is unconventional and asymmetric, how do you go about fighting such groups?
Well, it's quite simple. In fact, if you look at the logistics of having to support such a large territory, the movement of the vehicles is the best way. In fact, that was one of the best ways that they've done it in Kosovo. They did it in Kuwait. They did it in Libya. And when, in fact, they went after all large armored vehicles, including Humvees and those types of vehicles that have been taken. And they're not targeting these particular targets. And to say that they're running out of targets is absolutely absurd. This is they're tickling ISIS. They're keeping it alive so that they have a boogeyman in order to basically have something that we can fund a massive military, because in fact the U.S. economy would crash if we did not have the persistent, perpetual war that is necessary to keep the economy alive.
What would you say to those who describe Obama's foreign policy as isolationist, as something which is not hell-bent on intervention and diving in headfirst into conflicts within the Middle East? Has Obama been more pragmatic than previous American presidents?
Well, I wouldn't use the term pragmatic. He's certainly not an isolationist. Obviously, he's has multiple wars on multiple continents. This is something that is certainly a facade when it comes to the fact that he speaks softly but carries a big stick, much like Roosevelt did. And the fact is that big stick has never hit harder. We've been continually going after countries and toppling countries. Look what we're doing in Ukraine, Yemen, what we did just destroyed a perfectly good country in Libya. So no, this is a horrific administration. It's an embarrassment, and the fact that people paint that kind of a picture of Obama is completely absurd.
Now, to what extent is the West responsible for failing to act in Syria?
failing to act. Oh, well, actually, we should talk about the instigation. When you talk about what happened in Dara, and you talk about these quote-unquote people that were assassinated or murdered during protests, let's be clear, the protests were very small, and we don't know who shot those people. In fact, people could have been shot in Dara from Golan Heights. The Israelis, the Jordanians, any of those people have great weaponry that can shoot from far away. So it was never clear who did the shooting, and the fact is that we're talking about less than a dozen people, and not certainly worth starting a worldwide war over. In fact, Americans are shot on a daily basis by police forces. We've had far more people killed by American police forces, so this is nothing out of the ordinary.
Well, why do you think that is? Just one quick last question. I mean, is there a difference between the way Western governments deal with protesters or individuals who have grievances? I mean, surely other places different from Syria have used very strong and potent force against peaceful protesters, and the reaction has been different. I mean, there were protests in Morocco at the start of the Arab Spring, which were given no reporting whatsoever. Why is Syria different? Is it political? Is it just a matter of strategic importance within the region?
Well, certainly strategic importance, but it's not much different. When you talk about countries when there's uprisings, it depends on the police forces, it depends on the regions, it depends on the different societies that live in those regions, obviously the cultural differences, and the reactions that you get between people can be long-standing oppositions to many ideological, political, cultural views. So when individuals react in such a way, that obviously deadly force, unfortunately, happens everywhere, and certainly doesn't require Western intervention to go in and fund massive amounts of mercenaries for several years to actually destroy a perfectly good country.
Okay, Sukan, if you'd like to jump in on here, I mean, the ISIS threat is grave. It's been exaggerated to an extent, but if it is so important, then why is the West continuing to undermine the Syrian government? Is it because the West are right and Assad is not a suitable leader for Syria, or is there different agendas and means?
Well, it was way before the Arab sting that a former leader of the USA military, said in an interview with Amy Goodman that the aim of the United States foreign policy in the Middle East, North Africa, is to knock out half a dozen countries nearly, which included Syria. Syria has always been a thorn in the side of the Zionist state and the Zionist state's senior partners or colleagues in London, Paris, and Washington in the region. Syria and also the Islamic Republic Iran are the main backers and supporters of the Lebanese Hezbollah movement, which is the most potent anti-Zionist, non-state actors on the globe. So anyway,
but on the other hand, you would have people arguing that Israel attacked Syria numerous times. I mean, they bombed Syrian military bases, and Syria and Iran and Hezbollah to an extent did not respond. Is this truly a narrative of being anti-Zionist or anti-Israeli, or is it just a reason to be in power, a motive, an instrument?
Well, I think the Syrian government is not foolish if people think a provocative action against the biggest armed power in the region without any sensible strategy in actually fighting that power is a wise thing. Well, they're frankly fools. No, the Syrian government employs a wise strategy in relation to the enemy in the form of the white colonial settler state, so-called Israel. And I think they've been doing a very good job, despite the fact that Syria is de facto partitioned and traumatized and plunged into this neo-colonial war. Despite all this, the interesting thing is, and despite all the trauma and the horrific division in the region, that the struggle of the resistance axis against the white colonial settler state is actually on course. Now, internal to Palestine, in terms of the Palestinian resistance, yes, there's definitely been strategic degradation on that front. But when we're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Syrian government and Lebanese Hezbollah, actually they're stronger than they've ever been in relation to the resistance and the struggle against the Zionist state. But that thing is...
Are you talking about now?
Sorry?
Are you talking about now?
Yeah, I am talking about now as well. And it's interesting because the reason...
But why would you say that when clearly... and President Assad is as beleaguered as ever. I mean,
No,
Syrian
he's beleaguered.
army in the
It's
Syrian government is...
That's absolutely true. His back is against the wall. That's true. But this is the kind of contradictory situation. Because if you see, the United Nations itself complained against the Zionist state that why is in open collusion with the death squad known as Jabhat Nusra, replacing United Nations personnel in the Golan Heights with the death squads of Nusra. And one of the main reasons that Syria did not face an open war of aggression in a similar model that Libya did in 2011 is not only because of the Russian Navy was off the coast of Latakia saying to the West, well, this is a red line, and if you attack Syria, you got us to deal with, but also because the Lebanese resistance and the Syrian resistance led by the government, and particularly the Revolutionary Guards from Iran, were on the Golan Heights, right on the doorstep of the Zionist state. And this confluence of strategic self-defense on Syria is what sabotaged a potential so-called no-fly zone, i.e. a code word for an open war of aggression and destruction against Syria like we saw in Libya. So actually there is violently contradictory developments taking place in the region, but I don't want to downplay, and my interest is not to downplay the colossal challenges and problems that the region faces.
Now President Assad admitted that there is some sort of dialogue between him and the United States, but there has been no real intelligence sharing, and the US and Syria have not really seen eye to eye or had direct contact. It's usually done through a third party. Now, if Syria was to somehow join the global coalition to fight ISIS, what kind of role could it possibly play?
Well, first of all, there is no global coalition against ISIS, and I think Brother Scott has very brilliantly kind of laid out
what would you describe it as then?
I would describe it as a neo-colonial war of terrorism against our people of the global south. There is no war on terror. The whole war on terror charade is exactly that. It's just a deceitful strategy to befuddle the minds of those minds who can be befuddled. Many people can't, it has to be said, in covering up the covert nature of this death squad operation. It's nothing new. The British did it in relation to Afghanistan in the 1980s. The British did it in relation to the loyalist death squads in Ireland and the so-called Troubles. And of course, the USA had been up to this also in Afghanistan in the 1980s, and also in their first operation in actually testing out this death squad strategy, in Central and Southern America throughout the 70s
from a
and
British
80s.
perspective, we have the issue of radicalization, which is a reality on the ground. It's something which many people suffer from. Now, how can, as the UK government, how can they stop potential jihadists going to Syria through Turkey?
Well, first of all, the British government is far from interested in stopping the supply of death squad recruits from Britain through Turkey into Syria, as you say. But if they were vested in that, first of all, I would argue that fundamentally the whole nature of the British system needs to be turned inside out. But that aside, if you were to ask me a shopping list of the things that they should be doing, well, it's quite simple. The British intelligence services are well aware of who is in sympathy with and in communication with the death squads in the region. They've got the intelligence there. They know how the network is laid out in Britain. So easily some arrests can be made and some kind of law and order measures can be taken against these individuals. We have to keep in mind that the British state employs many thousands of personnel directly engaged in snooping and surveillance against those people who are even watching and reading Nusra al-Sham or so-called ISIS materials online, let alone being in touch with the recruiters of these death squads, and let alone those people who are in touch with a view and with a vested will to go out and to participate in the death squad activities.
Now,
make no mistake, the British government is well aware of what's going on.
Okay, if we could take this to Iyad Khudr here, can the West and Syria put aside their differences for the greater good, or is it too late?
I'm very grateful. Please, the question.
Hello, Iyad.
Would you please say the question again, because the voice quality is poor.
Sorry, I think the connection is is fading. If we could take this to Scott Reichard now, on the issue of US policy towards Syria, is that influenced by the number of US jihadists currently fighting with ISIS in the Middle East?
Absolutely not. You're looking at numbers only about 3,000 to 4,000 that are coming out of the West total. And when you look at the total number of participants, that makes up less than 10%. And most of the participants are out of Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, and Jordan. So this is really, as Brother Sukkant was saying, is very serious about creating a facade. And, a coalition, that's a joke. 80% of all the operations are run by American intelligence and American logistics. And they're operating very freely in Jordan and in Iraq, also and in Turkey. And when Brother Sukkant says that they're not trying to stop these individuals going into Syria and Iraq, that's absolutely true. These borders are wide open. They're allowing these borders to open up. The only place that they didn't want them to take over was Kobani. They didn't allow Kobani to go under.
Is that strictly because it's a Kurdish issue? It's a Kurdish area?
Absolutely. The Peshmerga are partnered with the West and the North. They've been partnered with the West through all of the oil assets, everything that's going on. They were getting very successful. They were getting ready to split away from Iraq and do their own oil exchange at the time. So this is a real serious event. When you talk about strategies, the strategy absolutely has to do with petrochemical performance. Obviously, nobody wants to put a giant tanker environment off the coast of Israel, but they'd certainly be willing to do it off the coast of Syria, and they'd be willing to take that real estate and use that real estate for gas and oil going straight into Europe and providing a competition to Russia, because Russia is crushing the West when it comes to oil and gas exploration and development.
Now, in regards to the issue of ISIS, I mean, we've discussed how the roots of the Islamic State in Iraq are to an extent linked with the American occupation, but since then a new administration has come into power. There's been a new style foreign policy. But how would you assess Obama's reaction to the ISIS threat? I mean, is the coalition working in any way or shape, or what can be done to make it work in a more succinct manner?
So is it working in the current state? Absolutely not, and that's by design. You can't, you cannot eradicate the pests if you want to stay in business as an exterminator. And so what they've done is they've basically teased it and kept it alive and funded it and kept it going. And to their strategic benefit, they're basically creating chaos in the region, whereby economic prosperity and geopolitical prosperity is completely minimized. So what could be done is to go in and negotiate with individuals like Syria, like Iran, and like the Peshmerga, and say, look, we're going to go ahead and eradicate these guys. This is what the guys that we've actually sent in there. They're very effective at what they do. Here's what we've taught them how to do, and we can actually eliminate them.
Do you see the U.S. Teaming up with Iran in Iraq? Is that a positive step?
Well, it would be, but unfortunately the U.S. is so brainwashed as a society against Iran because of the unfortunate relationship the U.S. has had with the United Kingdom in really subverting the sovereignty of that country for over a century. So you have the U.S. taking over the reins in the 50s and then being kicked out in the late 70s. And so Americans have an unrealistic view of what Iran really is. But Iran has actually done a fantastic job at providing advisory roles and helping the Iraqis, the Iraqi militia specifically, on the eastern side of Iraq, maintain some control. But when you talk about the control along the Euphrates and the kind of control that these mercenaries have had along the Euphrates, it's been almost untouched, except for maybe Ramadi and certainly at the far north in Kobani, where the Euphrates starts out of the mountains. So there's really been very little success against the territory that's been held by ISIS. They still hold about 80% of the territory that they had that was prior to the quote-unquote coalition that the U.S. is really pretty much spearheading. And so So what I say here is, no, this has not been an effective campaign. It's been deliberately ineffective, and it could be made very effective with the proper coordination, diplomacy, and really strategically and tactically focused attack against these individuals that really called for the same kind of initiatives that were done in Kosovo. Because in Kosovo, as I was saying earlier, 30,000 combat sorties were done in a 74-period day that shut down an army of 85,000 soldiers. Where we have, here over almost a year now, since August of last year, they've only done 6,000 sorties. So let's be clear there. There's not any type of effective initiatives, and they have much better intelligence than they had in the late 90s.
It seems more symbolic than it does
It's
hardcore
absolutely
military
symbolic.
intervention.
It feeds the fear, and it creates the boogeyman that they can continually go and get funded for these unnecessary campaigns.
Okay, thank you. Scott Reichard, former American intelligence linguist, joined us from the US. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Sukant, ISIS has up to 20,000 foreign fighters. What is the best way to actually fight this group? Is it easier said than done?
Well, as long as Syria has a uncontrollable border with its neighbors, particularly the Turkish state and the Jordanian state, and obviously Iraq, there's going to be an endless supply, unfortunately and tragically, of death squad recruits going into Syria to devastate that country. And so obviously there's got to be some serious changes on the Iraq side, but that's not going to be on the table in the foreseeable future. And similarly in Jordan and Turkey, both states are absolutely embedded in this death squad project in destroying Syria. I'd like to kind of also draw the audience attention to the fact that the Western mainstream media is awash. I mean, you can hardly read an article about so-called ISIS without these articles saying, well, Jabhat Nusra is the people we can do business with. Openly now on Al Jazeera, we're having the anchors, so it's an editorial line of Al Jazeera.
But Al Jazeera is Qatari almost state media. It's not the mainstream Western media. In fact,
but
we could argue that the Western media, in terms of Al Nusra Front, some of them have asked for more airstrikes to be taken against this particular group. But in regards to a more social aspect on ISIS, this is a religiously extreme group which believes in core values which emanate from centuries ago. I mean, the barbarism they've inflicted on people in Syria and Iraq are unprecedented. What would compel a UK citizen, a British Muslim, to go to Iraq or Syria and fight alongside this group? Now, Western policy aside, what social aspects would lead to them doing that?
Well, Western states are oppressive, and they're particularly oppressive against black and Asian people and people from the region who reside here. There is Islamophobia, there is white supremacy racism that exists all across the West, including in Britain. There is an alienation of our young people, all our young people actually. They're traumatized by the mass media entertainment industry, etc. They're oppressed as well in the West in general and in Britain in particular. So, especially when they're at a relatively vulnerable age and confusing age in their teens and early 20s, then people are looking, these young people who are oppressed are looking for a way out in terms of rebellion and resistance, etc. Unfortunately, and as Scott quite rightly said, ISIS has been promoted as the existentialist threat to the Western global order by the West itself. So if you're young and if you're a little bit confused and you don't have anyone who's giving you a cultural, spiritual, political clarity in these kind of things, and then you have these very swaggerish, often relatively young men who are recruiting for the death squads in this kind of very vociferous, bombastic type of apparent radical rhetoric, then of course some of our young people are going to be attracted to that. I think what we do not have in Britain as a countermeasure to this problem is a movement that resists this death squad project, that is not in touch with and ingratiated to the British state, and at the same time is not soft peddling the death squads with the pro-Muslim Brotherhood, pro-Al-Qaeda, ISIS circles in Britain. There's no actual middle ground between these two who are opposed to the death squads and who are opposed to the British state. We don't have a political force in this country that's working in that regard.
Please stay with us as we move on to the next section. Of late, many have regarded the regime in Syria and its beleaguered president as on the ropes and struggling to survive. The government faces mounting pressure on several fronts in the war, losing swathes of territory to opposition fighters as well as the Islamic State, with strategic resources under its control coming under constant attack. Defeats in Idlib and eastern Homs and Daraa in the south, combined with renewed pressure in Aleppo and Deir ez-Zor to the east and the possible loss of gas fields to ISIS, have left the regime in a precarious position with little choice but to concentrate its forces in the western strongholds, ceding much of the territory and the country to opposition and ISIS. Much of the country is under the control of rebel fighters in the Islamic State, but after the loss of strategic bases in Daraa and defeats in Idlib and eastern Homs. To discuss this further, let me introduce Afra Dagher, a Syrian political activist, and Rima Naise, a journalist and writer joining us from Latakia in Syria. Afra Dagher, if I could just start with you, how bad are things for the Syrian government?
Well, this is normal because of increased support from the US side, from the US anti-allies to their proxies inside Syria. So the so-called anti-ISIS coalition is just support to those ISIS inside Syria. And these advances of this ISIS inside Syria refers to the failure of the Western policy towards those terrorists. So the real aim from the USA is to fight against Assad, not against the terrorists inside Syria.
Now, how would you describe the loss of Palmyra?
Well, I will tell you, this is not normal war here in Syria. It is an open war. I can call it also as guerrilla war. We fight for more than 200 fronts inside Syria. So we will take back, I think, Palmyra, but it is a matter of time. They try to make it look like the collapsing of the Syrian army, but this is not true. The situation is really hard, and I think we are exhausted after more than 4 years of war on Syria, and we also face more than 400 armed factions, and you will see Turkey with ISIS in the north of Syria, and also Israel and Jordan support the ISIS in the south of Syria. We, the Syrian Arab Army, is the only one who fight those terrorists. They attack us, and we counterattack them. They capture some sites, and we recapture another site. That is my view of points here.
If I could take this to Rima Naise now, how has Damascus reacted to recent rebel victories?
Hello, Mr. Dani.
Hello. Did you hear the question?
Good evening. I can't hear the question very well, but...
how has Damascus reacted to recent rebel victories?
Okay. First of all, it was not a total and an all-out victory or defeat for the Syrian army, because as military men say, it is a kind of tactical retreat or withdrawal, which is to give up some areas or places with no such a strategic military importance. And since the Syrian government army is keeping a great deal of its power and ability, and we don't notice any kind of collapse among its main or major units. And on the civil life, we notice that the government is still working with its full capacity and fitness, so that Syrians didn't view this development as critical or dangerous. On the future of the confrontations which are going on all Syrian territory.
Now, was ISIS taking over Palmyra the breaking point?
No, I don't think so. This control of the military territory is very weak, actually, and fragile, because to run and administer these great areas, it will involve double and multiple forces to run these great areas on the ground. On the other hand, the territory you are talking about is mainly desert and empty of population and has no factors to be an independent political entity, regardless of its historical value.
Rima, hold your thought. Sukant, if I could take this to you, what can be done to solve and stop the Syria conflict now?
Well, realistically, the only thing that could be done is a victory to the Syrian Arab army and its allied forces within Syria and its support that it's getting from its regional and global forces, because really it's that alliance that's pushing back against this war and divisive, traumatic death squad project in Syria. Aside from that, and that's obviously something that's not going to be the case for another 15 to 20 years, and of course the Syrian people can't afford to spend another 2 decades in this horrific mess. And in line with all my respect to the Syrian people fighting this on the ground and our Syrian colleagues on our show today. But apart from that, it has to be some fundamental change, like I said before, on the border regions with Iraq, Jordan and Turkey, but there's no sign of that. So again, I go back that the global south, particularly the BRICS, allied to the Syrian government, need to find a position in the world in the foreseeable future where they can start actually calling the shots and they can actually, frankly, smack down the West and its regional allies in developing this divide and ruin death squad project.
Afra Dagher, question to you. Why are the militants gaining so much momentum?
Sorry, didn't hear you well. Why the militants gaining?
Why are the militants gaining so much momentum?
For Syrian Arab Army, there is something important I want to mention here. We shouldn't turn a blind eye about their victory in Al-Qalamun mountain. This is an important front in this war. And we also should notice that there is a psychological war propaganda against Syrian people to feel that their army is losing the war. And I told you that our army is still capturing some important sites, and also for the ISIS is not controlling 50% of the Syrian territory. We can say, in other words, that ISIS have a presence in around 50% of Syrian territory, and they don't control all of it. So Syrian Arab Army recaptured some important sites, and to solve this problem, the key point here is to make some negotiation with USA and with Turkey, and not with the so-called oppositions, because one can present those oppositions. It's ISIS or who.
Afra Dagher, Syrian political activist, joined us on the line. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Now, Rima Naise, what can we expect in Syria in the future?
Syria has been resisting the terror attack on its territory for the last 4 years and showed great steadfastness due to the strength of its people and army, and the existence of the great and support friends on their support of the Syrians. And the Syrian actually counts very much, and that support and help was successful during the last week.
Okay, Rima Naise, a journalist and writer, joined us from Latakia. Thank you very much. Sukant, last question to you. How do you see events transpiring in Syria now?
I'm not sure things are going to get any better anytime soon, because the West is openly talking about reaching out to the death squad known as Nusra, as in their opinion they think is the antidote to ISIS. And it's very clear that any movement in defense of the people of Syria and Iraq is at the same time against the interests of the West. So I can't really see a situation where the West will be forced into negotiations. They've got a seemingly limitless supply of weaponry and recruits going into Syria via their regional allies there. So, and as Scott said previously in the show as well, he brilliantly laid out the petrochemical strategy, the military-industrial strategy that all benefits this war in Syria and the wider region. With Yemen as well, we continue to see the proliferation and the growing incapacity of the death squad. So unfortunately, and I'm sorry to bring this bad news, but don't shoot the messenger, I don't see things improving there. However, there is some indications of positive change in the last year. More recently, we've been seeing that the Egyptian government and the Tunisian government has teamed up with the Algerian government in supporting a move against the death squads in Libya, which is a very positive development. The Tunisian government has re-established relations with the Syrian government. The Egyptian government pushed back against the pro-death squad forces in the form of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood and its allied partners there. So there is some shift happening, and the hope is that Iran joins that alliance with Egypt and Algeria and Tunisia and really starts a concerted regional pushback against this.
We have time. Sukan Chandan, political commentator, joined us from the studio. Thank you very much, and a big thank you to all of my guests today. Thanks for watching Syria Talks. Until next time.